Hey guys, Spirit of the Law here. A couple of weeks back, I did a prediction video for which civilizations I thought would end up being the biggest winners and losers of the April patch. There's been over 300,000 ranked 1v1 games played since then with the new balance changes. So in this video, we're going to take a look at the results so far, courtesy of the website AoE Stats, and see how things have shaken out. Some of the results were pretty easy to call, but there were plenty of unexpected and interesting patterns coming through, which we'll take a look at. We'll start with the patch's biggest winners, which I'll define as any civilization that's jumped at least 10 spots in the rankings, of which there are actually several examples. The first we have to address is the Italians, who are having their biggest renaissance since the 1500s. There's really no surprise here, with the patch giving them extra armor on their archers throughout the game, as well as a new unique tech in Imperial Age for their hand cannons. If we look at them before the newest patch, notice they were struggling particularly in the early game, winning about 45 to 46% of games lasting under 30 minutes, though even in the longest 45 plus minute games, they were barely winning half the time. Looking at the new stats post-patch, notice a massive bump in win rate far outside their usual range, and that they've really become a force to be reckoned with in the mid to late game. To put that turnaround into perspective, they jumped from 39th in overall win rate last patch to now 9th across all maps, and on Arabia 1v1 specifically, went from 44th out of 45 civilizations to now number 12. Their archer line improvement is clearly paying dividends, especially when infantry is suddenly in vogue, and the stars really aligned for the Italians this patch. The team game data is also quite rosy, putting them right on the edge of top 10 as a solid flank civ, and easily the biggest winner of the patch overall. Next up, another big winner are the Japanese. It was pretty obvious that infantry civs were collectively going to start doing better with all the militia line and unique infantry unit buffs, but I regret not predicting this civ specifically as an outsized winner, which they've turned out to be. Prior to the new patch, you can see from their 1v1 Arabia profile, they had a very solid early game, but then just underperformed after that, hanging out somewhere between average and bottom tier if you look at their rank over the last several years on Arabia, though I should note they've always been a very good water map civ. The new patch pushing infantry was naturally big for a civ with such a strong bonus for those already, but remember Japanese half-price mills also set them up to benefit from the introduction of wild chickens on Arabia. If we look at their stats now, their win rate in games of all length is up by about 5% across the board, and their ranking in 1v1 Arabia has jumped from 40th out of 45 civilizations last patch up to 16th, making them comfortably above average for the first time in 1v1 Arabia stats ever, as far as I know. That said, a lot of these strong men-at-arms civilizations saw a trend in the same direction, here circling the win rate improvement on the last patch for Bulgarians, Dravidians, Romans, Vikings, Goths, and Malians, as some other examples of good men-at-arms civilizations, and there's clearly a trend happening. Worth noting is now 6 of the top 10 civilizations feel like they can pull off a good men-at-arms opening, so the data seems to back up the general feeling of the fanbase that the newest round of changes are finally making men-at-arms viable, while also not being totally necessary for a top-performing civ, with a couple of good scout and archer civs in the top tier as well. Overall, it just feels like a great place for the game to be. Next up, rounding out our biggest winners beyond Italians and infantry civilizations, we have a very random sounding one next, with the Britons. Across all maps 1v1, they've surprisingly gone from a basement-dwelling 44th rank out of 45 up to 30th this patch, and on Arabia 1v1 specifically, jumped from 34th to 24th. That's one of the largest improvements of all civilizations, and fits our criteria of a 10 ranking jump, which is particularly interesting because they didn't receive any targeted changes. Outside of maybe just a bit of noisy data, a few possible explanations are that being an archer civ is just better at the moment in the more infantry-heavy climate, and we do see some suggestive bumps to support that from Ethiopians and Mayans as well. There's a narrative you can weave that maybe reduced scout aggression in favor of men-at-arms is good for these sorts of archer civs, though other archer civs like Vietnamese and Koreans don't seem to benefit in the same way, so that narrative doesn't perfectly fit the data. Another explanation might be that Britons are utilizing men-at-arms rushes themselves with some success from their sheep bonus, or that again chickens might be playing a small role here. And whatever the reason, even among their archer civ peers that are doing a bit better, Britons just seem to be benefiting the most. Of course, with all these winners, some civs must be losing out, and now let's flip things around and talk about some of those biggest losers. We'll start with one that was a very easy correct call in the prediction video, with the Georgians. They received a direct nerf to their cavalry healing rate, particularly in Feudal and Castle Age, and have so far tanked this patch from 9th in 1v1 Arabia last patch all the way down to number 32. Across all maps, they're doing even worse, dropping from 17th to 42nd, dragged down the most by runestones in Arena, but have been technically below average on every map of the latest pool. I think everyone saw something like this coming, but maybe not quite this dramatic. What's interesting is if we superimpose their old patch data in red and the new patch data in blue, their performance in quick games is remarkably similar, but then they completely nosedive in the transition to the mid-game, as the missing bit of extra healing on scouts, knights, or cavalry archers starts to add up. Now, whether or not this is part of a pattern of weakness for scouts in the new meta is actually a difficult question to answer. On the one hand, Turks and Cumans are both down so far as a couple of the other biggest losers, and both feel a little extra encouraged to open scouts with weak-looking early game data. That said, particularly Cumans have unique factors involved, like how men-at-arms may be interacting with the second town center play, which makes it hard to conclude anything about scouts here specifically. Complicating things further, Mongols and Magyars are a couple of other quintessential scout rushing civs, and are still doing just fine this patch, with Magyars actually improving somewhat. Remember, Magyars still get +1 attack on men-at-arms in Feudal Age for free, so maybe scouts are being nerfed, and Magyars are just able to play around that better than Turks, Cumans, and other less flexible scout civilizations. Next up, another loser that's interesting to look at is the Sicilians. Now, I'd predicted they'd be a winner, specifically for sub 850 elo on Arabia, where I thought their change unlocking Donjons and Dark Age would only help their early aggression. Looking at the before and after at lower elo, that aggression is pretty much the same, and at lower levels, I'd say they're doing about as well as ever. What's more interesting is at higher elo ratings, Sicilians are so far getting hammered. If we look at how they're doing across elo rating brackets, at 1200 elo and up, they were previously around a 48% win rate, and are so far down to under 44. That may not sound like a lot, but it puts them from roughly average to now bottom 5 on Arabia for 1200 elo and up. The changes to the sergeant's cost, moving gold to food, and losing pierce armor in exchange for more melee armor seems to be having a negative impact overall on the civilization, particularly at high elo. Moving on, our final loser is the Bengalis, who are down a dramatic 16 positions, going from 25th to 41st overall. And in fact, only the Georgians have fallen further down the rankings, which comes in the back of what's looked like pretty modest nerfs to the HP and training time of the Bengali unique unit. It's hard to believe that would cause such a strong reaction, though notice a recent jump up of a similar magnitude a few patches ago actually corresponded with +1/+1 armor on that unit and a bit of bonus damage against spears, with no other direct Bengali changes. Maybe they just really ride or die with the exact balance of their chariots, though keep in mind they also have the lowest play rate of all civilizations, with less than 4,000 games to go on here, so it's possible things just haven't settled yet and they'll bounce back with a larger sample. For reference, we have about 6 times as many 1v1s played by Mongols to draw from, so we'll just call the Bengalis drop interesting to note so far, and something to keep an eye on as more data comes in. So those are the biggest winners and losers from a pure ranking standpoint, the majority of which I think were pretty easy to see coming. Digging through the data though, I noticed a few others that I think end up making for interesting discussion, and we'll go through these ones relatively quickly. The first is the Hindustanis, who, given their general weakness against infantry specialized civilizations in the stats, I thought might struggle in this patch with all the infantry buffs. It turns out though they're doing just fine, and in fact still in the top 10. Instead, it's the Gurjaras who are tanking, maybe being a bit too slow out of the gate and having their all-important mills rushed down by men-at-arms. In addition to losing a lot of quick games and taking a dive this patch in win rate, Gurjaras are now the lowest performing civilization at the moment across all maps, and battling it out with Turks for the bottom spot on Arabia. Luckily, with a unique mill bonus, it would actually be incredibly easy for the devs to target Gurjaras early game with a buff by just tweaking the mill's food generation speed, if they were so inclined next patch. Another interesting civ to note are the Aztecs. I had thought that they might be a winner this patch, either because of the general infantry buff or even the Jaguar changes specifically, making that unit seem a lot more well-rounded and harder hitting. What we got though so far is Aztecs sitting completely flat on this patch by rank and win rate, still sitting in the bottom 5. Another surprising one for me was that Chinese, Koreans, and Vietnamese don't seem to be impacted by their new units. Chinese are technically down a little, though it's in line with past results, and especially this early on doesn't seem significant in either the technical or informal use of that term. Koreans and Vietnamese likewise are performing in line with last patch, despite Chinese and Koreans' play rate being up significantly. It's hard to say if an influx of new players to those civs might be impacting this in some way, but from a more optimistic angle, maybe it just says the new rocket carts and fire lancers are well balanced, while clearly being something players want to test out. But finally, I want to close on my predicted nothing burger, Flemish Militia. I kind of called out this unit for not really adding a lot to the Burgundians that the Spearline didn't already do better, and I got a few comments saying I was overlooking it as a cheap transition unit that automatically upgrades as its main selling feature. That's fair enough, but looking at the stats, Burgundians are just kind of bad, and this didn't seem to help. They went from 45th to 44th lowest win rate overall this patch, but that's mostly just because Gurjaras are tanking. Burgundians are also really struggling hard out of the gate, barely winning a third of games that last under 30 minutes. That said, we're talking about a 45 or 46% win rate being near the bottom of a game with a lot of diversity and 45 different civilizations, which is pretty impressive, all things considered. So that was a quick survey of the new patch data so far. It's honestly massive to have community sites like Gerbot's AoE Stats to add some data to balance discussions, and it's surprising to me Microsoft spends hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to sponsor tournaments, but can't find $60 a month to pay the server cost to back a site like this, which I think adds a lot to the community. The guy running AoE Stats is incredibly nice, and last I heard was doing a PhD in something computer related and super smart sounding, while just running the website on the side as a public service out of his own pocket. If you have a couple of bucks and want to support a great asset to the AoE2 scene, I'll link the Buy a Coffee page to the website below. Naturally, I try to help it out given how much I use it, but I don't think he's had a donation yet this year, and could probably use a few coffees paid for by AoE2 fans for keeping it going and bringing us so much cool data. That'll do it for this one though. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you next time.